Hello everyone and welcome to this channel. That's right, we're back with Oh the Humanity, and today we are going to be looking at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting off with Iron Man and what is going to be a series of rewatches of this film franchise. Now, I was originally going to do something a little bit more scripted, a little bit more rehearsed. The idea was I was going to do a whole rewrite of the villains, and it was going to be the idea of the inhumanity of these villains. But instead I'm just going to be doing more of just a rewatch contemplation kind of thing, because I feel like it's easier to make, it is easier for me to record, and it doesn't require as much editing, hopefully. Before we get into it, I do want to say that I still am kind of a Marvel fan. Obviously, I've been into the characters for a very long time. When I was younger, I had my Tobey Maguire Spider-Man costume, for some reason my entire generation did, but I never really looked at it from a critical lens, primarily because superheroes were sort of my fantasy escapism concept, and I was very into just the genre as a whole, either because of the fact that I was a small young boy growing up with this idea and therefore that somehow had to be what I was interested in, or just simply because it's enjoyable, and it is enjoyable. I do not want to shit all over this franchise from the perspective of it's stupid, because it's not actually that deep. I do, however, want to examine the lens of how we can make this more interesting while still keeping that level of fun, because I don't think those ideas contradict each other. And I think that the closer and closer Disney got to homogenizing these ideas into something that's easily digestible, the farther and farther they got from them having any individual meaning. And it's frustrating because nobody seems to care. There's so many people that seem completely content with saying that the MCU's direction is perfect, and that's fine if it's working for you. I just feel like there are alternatives, and I feel like it's much better to look at the MCU from this angle of, okay, why didn't this work, rather than why did it work? Because so many people love to act like this is the ultimate success story, primarily because A, it's mass appealing, and B, it made a lot of money. And those two things are not the measure of a film's success. They can play into it, sure, and I do think that a film appealing to a wider audience is a sign that it's doing at least something somewhat right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only thing that it can do right, or that the only thing that it should do right. And I don't think that means that it's inherently successful just because a lot of people watched it and or liked it. So, without further ado, we're going to get into the first entry in the MCU, and that is 2008's Iron Man. Now, I've seen this movie a few times, but it wasn't the first MCU movie I watched. The first one I watched was actually Thor. I saw it in theaters with my mom, and we later went and watched all the other ones back. We were super excited when Captain America came out. The first Avenger, I think, is still one of my favorite MCU movies on a personal note. We'll see when we get to it. But the first Avengers movie was a huge changing point inside of my life. Watching it on the opening day was so crazy for me. It was such a fun time. And now looking back on it, nearly 10 years later, it is a little interesting to sort of remember brief moments from Iron Man while still kind of filling in the gaps of what things were actually happening within the movie. Because even though I can definitely rehearse some of these scenes in my head as yes, I remember exactly how this scene went, where he turned back towards the tank and shot the missile and walked away and there was an explosion. At the end of the day, the actual ideas within the movie kind of feel like they get lost. And I think that's intentional for a couple of reasons. I think it's interesting too because this is the first film that both in the MCU and also the first film with military contracts involved. And I know it may seem does that really matter? But it does, especially for Marvel and especially for Iron Man, because this kind of set the tone for how these movies would be produced. They're not going to be too scathing of the government, because the government is literally handing them money in order to make movies, and they're also literally censoring them. I don't think people talk about that enough, how these movies literally have the right to be censored by the government because they'll pull funds if they don't shed a good light on the government. But in any case, watching it back now, it feels a lot more propaganda-ish, and it feels a lot more clearly trying to play down how terrible the Middle Eastern conflict is for everybody, including America, primarily just because it's bad. War is not good. War is bad. And while it does ultimately try to shift the blame less from, the evil Middle Eastern bad guy instead towards the greedy capitalist, at the end of the day, it still has an underlying issue where the good guy isn't someone who's trying to end the war, but rather trying to push the war in a direction which benefits him more. Tony Stark sure was narcissistic and making tons of money off of this beforehand, but now he has a conscience, and he isn't happy that American soldiers are being killed with his weapons. It's not that he's not happy with the concept of war in general, because he's more than happy to put on a suit and run out there and kill a bunch of bad guys. But he's frustrated with the fact that it's being done so without his control. Tony Stark's arc within this movie is less about him coming to terms with being called the Merchant of Death, but rather not having that name as something he can claim for himself. He wants the recognition, he wants the control, he wants to be able to say, I am Iron Man, not Obadiah Stane, not the US government. Nobody gets to be the villain except for me, which feels like not really great. And it's kind of weird because it's like I'm calling him a villain, and I didn't even mean to call him a villain. It's just one of those things that's like he's the bad guy in a lot of ways because he's still perpetrating violence, even if it's from the hey, he's stopping the bad guys. At the end of the day, the film never stops to ask who these bad guys are or what their motivations are beyond just power for the sake of power. And it's frustrating because that's not what war is. War is not just fighting for the sake of fighting because some people are just evil and want power desperately. War is usually based on either being put in competition with somebody or an ideological difference, sometimes both. And in the case where they have this war literally simplified down to no, they just want power because they just do. That's their ideology, is power. It's a little frustrating because it distracts from the real world reasons that the Middle Eastern conflict happened. Even if you were to set up a scenario where these characters have no ethnic coding, like if they were aliens, they're still foreign in some way, and they still stand in opposition to the US government and its appeals to what exactly the world should look like. And in this case, the idea of what the world should look like is that smart, good, talented people should be able to have as much control over their world as they want, even if it stands in direct opposition of people that they can label as others or bad guys, which is kind of frustrating because there's no reason to assume that Tony Stark is the good guy here, because to be honest, he kind of isn't. And that kind of plays into the other major issue with this movie, which is Tony's rampant sexism, which I know seems like, oh, well, that's the bad thing. He's not supposed to be treating these women horribly. He's supposed to be a good moral boy by the end of the movie because he gets with Pepper, who's the nice girl. But the problem is that it's still degrading to claim that women who Tony is sleeping with, who are just fooling around with him, are bad. They're the bad ones for trying to sleep with Tony. Tony is supposed to be a good boy, but instead he keeps getting lured in by these vices of these women. And if he just settles down with Pepper, who can be sexy in her own way and not sexy in a very slutty way, then that's clearly the better option. And it's stupid because that's not how things work. Pepper is given no agency in terms of this relationship. It's almost like she's just kind of whisked into it and just kind of falls for Tony's charm naturally, even though we have no reason really to assume why she likes him. He's annoying, and he treats her with no respect, and he constantly puts her in stressful situations that she doesn't want to be a part of, and yet she cares for him when this unhealthy, parasocial relationship, where she feels as though her success is inherently tied to his because she's his employee, and therefore, if he's doing well, then she has to be doing well too. And it's really weird when you realize how accurately that describes their relationship basically for the rest of the MCU. It's almost like she doesn't want Tony to die because she doesn't imagine a world without him in it, because he's the only thing that matters to her. It's gross and it's creepy, and I hate their relationship, and I hate that became Endgame. Oh yeah, it's literally Endgame. Tony has a kid with her because that's how he shows he's grown, is by proceeding to indulge himself in this relationship that really doesn't seem very healthy. And I get that for some people might be like, who cares? Because if you do want to watch this movie and just want to be entertained, you can do it. It's not hard. The movie is very entertaining. It's very well shot in a way that is very, it keeps you enthralled within this action and within this world. And the effects have aged decently enough to the point that it's not distracting in any way. And I do applaud them for doing that, because that is a success in itself. And I think overall, as a result of having these characters that are very, tonally quirky or memorable in terms of their designs, in terms of their performances, in terms of their dialogue, you can argue, yes, it's just a good movie for that sake. I just wish, personally, that there was a little bit more thought put into what being a better person means for Tony beyond just having control, because that's not really an easy thing to just say, oh yeah, that's a better life for him, because control isn't inherently a great thing for someone in that position of power. It's almost like saying that Tony wants the exact same thing as the Ten Rings organization. They want to be the one with the biggest gun, who runs over the whole land, and who nobody steps out of line on their watch. I already watched Iron Man 2 earlier this year. I was doing this video where I was going to talk about bad superhero movies, but then I realized Nando V Movies kind of already has been doing that series, and if I were to do it, it would have to be like 2 40-minute long videos, which is a pain to edit, and I don't think very interesting. So instead we're going to be doing this, which obviously isn't any more original, but it's shorter and it's easier to edit. So when I watched Iron Man 2 earlier this year, I did realize how it literally has turned into that, where Tony is so good and so easily just a good person to the point that his argument within the entire movie is that he should just be allowed to have his weapons and do whatever he wants with them. And nobody should question him because the government's bad, and Justin Hammer is bad, and Whiplash is bad. And in those three, you basically describe this libertarian mindset where, yeah, the government shouldn't tell me what to do, and I should be allowed to compete with other capitalists, and I should be allowed to discriminate against foreign people, and that should be the American way. And despite the fact that Tony's supposed to be learning a lesson in this movie, nothing that he learns, again, contradicts that. Which we'll talk about that more when we get to Iron Man 2. Primarily, though, for this movie, I can't give it too much fault because, again, that is the sequel's fault. This is a setup for his character. And if I was looking at it purely from the perspective, which I think the film suggests, which is one where this is not one character arc movie where it's he just learns his lesson, now he's a good person by the end, it does leave room for growth, which is a good thing when you want to start a franchise with a character. I'm more frustrated by the way the direct film ended this idea without questioning any of the internal problems the film has faced. Tony's sexism is a flagrant thing on display, and it never addresses it in a way that A, presents why it's a bad thing, aside from just loose moral concepts, and B, presenting it in a way that Tony has just simply gained control back in his life, and therefore that makes him a better person somehow, without contextualizing how that's better, or what that changes about the world around him even. Because as far as we can tell, the conflict hasn't ended. Tony is still going to have to keep fighting the 10 rings. Just because it's easier for him now doesn't necessarily mean there's any less casualties at play. Just because more Americans aren't being put at risk, that doesn't mean that he's not killing more people. He hasn't lost the title of the Merchant of Death. He's simply owned up to it now and rebranded it as Iron Man instead because it sounds better in American propaganda. And it's really sad. And to be honest, it's really frustrating. And it's I only have this Iron Man shirt because as a kid, I couldn't figure that out because I didn't really have all the context of A, the real world, and B, just growing up and understanding how things work. And it's a little frustrating that some people can't do the same. Because if you just want to say it's fun, that's fine. If you just want to have fun, that's fine. Again, I'm not going to discriminate my personal memories of enjoying these movies both when I was a kid and in having personal experiences where I went to see them with my mom, and even just up to high school even, when I would do things like buy these kind of shirts, to my sense of enjoyment of it. I'm going to keep that in my head, and I'm going to value that. I'm also going to not let this film cloud over any sort of judgment I have over any other piece of media, or even the real world. If I look at one film and I criticize it for its portrayal of Middle Eastern cultures and the Middle Eastern conflict in its relation to America, I'm not going to give Iron Man an excuse just because, but I like it when he blows up people. It's cool looking. I'm going to treat it equally, and I'm going to treat my enjoyment of it separately from that, because I don't necessarily see watching film as something where you have to either enjoy it and also say it's good, or not enjoy it and therefore it's bad. I think that I can enjoy something and still think that it has problems and room for growth. And that's kind of why I started this channel. I think that it would be interesting more to talk about film from the perspective of how can we make this more human and more interesting and more relatable without getting rid of that element of enjoying it. How can we make this feel more intellectual without trying to discriminate from the idea of just simply enjoying it as a person? And I would hope that as I go through this series, I understand what that means a little bit more. And maybe I won't, maybe I will, but in any case, that's Iron Man for you. Hopefully that these videos can all stay under 20 minutes because I tend to talk for a long time. This is my third time trying to record this. So we're going to hope that it comes down to a nice even editing landmark. I can just put in a few visuals. Maybe I'll put in some background music to distract from the fact that the air conditioning was on the whole time because it's late at night and I need to record this because I'm not redoing my makeup for this. You can't really tell, but I was doing little gold accents for Iron Man. But in any case, thank you for watching. Hopefully you'll stick around for more of this because I enjoy making these videos even if I don't upload them, because sometimes it's hard to find time to edit things. So feel free to subscribe, I guess. And I'll see you in the next one where we'll be talking about The Incredible Hulk and hopefully maybe some other videos too. I don't know. Bye.